son knew very well. He knows everyone. He's also Lee Greenwood right from the beginning. That song went on. Trump 2028. We're driving the left crazy.
The sun bore down on the desert like a warning. Heat shimmered off the tarmac, and dust rolled lazily through the air as if the land itself was exhausted. Udeid Air Base in Qatar, home to thousands of U.S. troops, was alive with the quiet rhythm of duty. Wait, train, work, wait, repeat. That's what deployment was. A pattern, a grind, a sacrifice made daily, silently. But on this day in May 2025, the pattern broke. Word spread quickly. The kind of word that cuts through boredom like a blade. Trump's coming. For some, it sparked excitement. For others, curiosity. For all, it meant something different. Love him or hate him, when Donald J. Trump steps off a plane, he doesn't just arrive. He lands, with the force of a headline and the flair of a showman. And so, under a punishing Gulf sun, the 45th President of the United States walked onto the base in a navy suit and bright red tie, his silhouette familiar even through the haze. He didn't come for photo ops. Not just for them at least. He came with something more. A message. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't polished. But it was unmistakably Trump. You matter, he said, standing on a makeshift stage, flanked by camouflage and flags. Not just to me. Not just to your families. But to your country. And it's about time we act like it. The words echoed through the hangar. Polite claps gave way to something louder. Something real. Out here, miles away from Washington, far from campaign slogans, what mattered most was being seen, being heard, and maybe, just maybe, being rewarded for the weight of the uniform. And Trump didn't hold back. First of all, he said with a grin, you're getting a raise. It was the kind of announcement that carried gravity. Not just because troops had heard whispers of it before, but because now it was official. The 2026 defense budget would include a pay increase. One that covered every active duty member, regardless of rank. You signed up to protect freedom, he continued. And it's about time we stop making you carry the cost alone. That hit home. Not because money makes service easier, but because recognition, real, financial, meaningful recognition, says something. It says, we see you. And in the desert that matters. But the speech didn't stop there. Trump pivoted to strength, his favorite subject. He spoke of rebuilding a depleted military, of transforming what he described as a tired force into the world's most dominant. He threw out numbers, budgets, fleet sizes, readiness levels. But beneath it all was one core idea. America doesn't bow. It builds. It leads. Then came the big reveal. A $42 billion defense pact with Qatar. It wasn't just about weapons. It was about strategy, jobs, alliances. The agreement included the sale of advanced F-15 fighter jets and MQ-9B Reaper drones, boosting both the Pentagon's technological edge and U.S. defense industry profits. Simultaneously, a $10 billion investment was secured to modernize Al Udeid itself. Better housing, cutting-edge training grounds, and upgraded command infrastructure. Peace through strength, he said, echoing a phrase that had become synonymous with his military vision. But no Trump speech would be complete without a surprise. I have an idea, he said, pausing as if even he wasn't sure how it would land. It's bold. It's new. But it's time someone thinks differently. I call it the Freedom Zone. The vision? Gaza, rebuilt not as a battleground, but as a symbol of possibility. A global investment zone. Entertainment. Innovation. Prosperity. Guarded not by missiles, but by multinational cooperation. Some soldiers laughed. Others raised eyebrows. But most just listened. Because in this job, you learn to expect the unexpected. The president didn't pretend it would be easy. He compared it to past efforts people once mocked. Peace talks with North Korea, moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. We did those, he said. Why not this? Not everyone agreed. Some thought it a fantasy. But in a region shaped by conflict, even the idea of rebuilding can feel radical. Then, Trump turned to Afghanistan, a wound still fresh for many in uniform. The withdrawal, he said, was a disaster. We lost brave Americans because of poor leadership. That never should have happened. Not on my watch. It was a sharp jab at his successors. But for those who'd served there, who'd lost friends there, it wasn't about politics. It was about pain, and the need to believe it won't happen again. As the speech ended, Trump's tone softened. "You chose the hard road," he said, scanning the faces before him. "You gave up comfort, time, safety, for the rest of us. I came here to tell you one thing. We remember." There was no teleprompter. Just scribbled notes. Just Trump. Raw. Unfiltered. He stepped off the stage and into the crowd, shaking hands, signing hats, taking selfies. For a moment, the base felt less like a post and more like a reunion. A reminder that the people behind the uniforms aren't forgotten. Back home, experts debated his speech. Was the Gaza idea viable? Would the Qatar deals shift global power? Could pay raises affect morale? But in that moment, under that sun, none of that mattered. Because sometimes, all a soldier wants is to know that somebody has their back. And that day in Qatar they did. But the story didn't end there. In the days that followed, something began to shift. Small, almost imperceptible at first. It wasn't in policy memos or press conferences. It was in the way soldiers talked to each other. The way they walked, shoulders a bit more squared. The way they called home, voices carrying just a bit more pride. Because no matter what anyone thought of the man, of the politics, or of the campaign to come, he had shown up. He had looked them in the eye. And that left a mark. At chow time, the visit became legend. Replayed and retold in fragments between bites of bland rice and dry chicken. Did you see when he fist-bumped the sergeant from Philly? He signed my buddy's patch. He actually listened when I told him about our barracks AC. For a force so often shuffled and stationed in anonymity, recognition, however brief, was oxygen. In Washington, the narrative was more complicated. Cable news split down its usual lines. On one side, praise for Trump's renewed focus on defense, his instinct to connect directly with troops, and the symbolism of a leader willing to visit a base few politicians had entered in years. On the other, skepticism over his motives, over the timing, over the grandiose promises of Gaza and billion-dollar deals that might never materialize. But for the boots on the ground, politics wasn't the point. Presence was. In interviews afterward, one soldier put it simply, "I don't know what's real anymore back home. But here, that felt real." And it wasn't just the visit. Soon, Defense Department directives began moving. Drafts of the proposed pay raise were circulated through internal channels. Bonuses were modeled. Housing allowances reconsidered. The Freedom Zone initiative sparked interagency discussions involving USAID, state, and even outside NGOs. Qatar's embassy in Washington reported a surge in interest from US contractors and defense firms. Some of it would stall. Some of it would evolve. But movement had begun. And still, the heat in Qatar pressed on. Days passed. The base returned to rhythm. But the hangar where the speech took place was different now. Cleaned up, flags removed, but somehow, charged. Like a memory had settled in the air. A few soldiers started calling it Trump Bay. Not officially, of course, but in the way soldiers nickname everything. Half in jest, half in reverence. And just like that, a moment had become a marker. A reference point in their personal timelines. The stories continued spreading outward. Families back in Texas, Ohio, Montana, all hearing about what happened at Al Udeid. Not from CNN or Fox, but from their sons and daughters. From FaceTime calls filled with unusual enthusiasm. From letters that sounded less tired, more hopeful. One mother told her local paper, "He hugged my son. I saw it." And that means more than anything they argue about on TV. At military hospitals in Germany and Bethesda, wounded service members watched the footage from Qatar on hospital TVs. Some smiled, some scoffed, but all of them in some way processed what it meant. The country hadn't forgotten them. Not yet. Back on base, a corporal from Michigan began organizing a morale night, inspired by the energy of the visit. He called it Freedom Friday. Just music, card games, and laughter. Nothing official. But it caught on. Officers approved it. Troops showed up. For a few hours, the war zone paused. And from those tiny things, one handshake, one speech, one awkward joke at a rally, grew something larger. a rekindled connection between those who serve and the nation that benefits from their sacrifice. Of course, critics would continue to argue. That's what critics do. They said Trump weaponized patriotism, that he wrapped populism in camo and sold it as sincerity, that he used troops as props in a re-election bid. But those critics hadn't been in that hangar, hadn't felt the applause turn into something more, hadn't seen the tears in a young soldier's eyes when his commander-in-chief called him by name. Because, as always in war and politics, the truth isn't clean. It's layered, messy, often contradictory. What was undeniably true is this: a man showed up. And for many of those stationed in the endless heat, far from families and freeways, that meant everything. Weeks later, long after Trump had flown back to campaign trails and TV interviews, the rumors lingered. Did you hear they're bringing in new dorms next month? Yeah, and we might get upgraded comms by December. And the drones? Word is we're gonna train on the new Reapers. None of it guaranteed, but it felt different now. Possible. One evening, under a violet Qatari sky, a sergeant sat on a concrete step outside the barracks, writing in his journal. He'd been there when Trump spoke. He hadn't clapped much, didn't vote for him either. But he wrote something that night. You don't have to agree with a man to know when he means what he says. I think he meant it. And perhaps that's what mattered most. Not just the billion-dollar promises, or the media frenzy, or the political ramifications, but the quiet conviction, buried in the noise, that someone, anyone, still cared enough to show up.